And welcome back to the show. I'm so excited for today. I had a very special guest come on to share her story behind a very meaningful and important topic. And that is around her story with incarceration, how that tied into her understanding of agency being removed, learned helplessness, and coercion, on top of living in an environment with lots of individuals that were very activated. From her story, she shares how she was freed by dog training in a really beautiful way in her experience, and how that's led to her whole ethos behind the work that she does. So I'm so excited to share this with you. I think this topic is incredibly important. And without further ado, let's get into the show. Hey friends, and welcome to the Co-Regulated Canines podcast. I'm Ashley Cipoletti, your host, and I'm on a mission to create more connection. Dogs are really just the starting point. Together, we'll explore how to live with more harmony, ease, and healing so we can show up more as the best version of ourselves, not just for our dogs, but also for our community and our planet too. So grab a coffee and let's dive in. Welcome back to the Co-Regulated Canines podcast. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Mattison Skoog Simpson. She's a multi-certified dog trainer and behavior consultant and a firm believer in second chances. After learning to train dogs in a prison program, she now helps people build deep, lasting relationships with their complex or sensitive dogs through her business, Freed by Training. Her story is one of transformation, purpose, and the powerful connection between dogs and the people who love them. Mattison, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. I am so excited for this conversation.
Yes, me too. And so we actually met a while back when I was a guest on your podcast, Dog Training Bites, and I shared my kind of personal, vulnerable story. And yeah, it feels like a full circle moment to have you here with us today, sharing your own. And we were just reconnecting before we hit record, but again, on how we kind of started this conversation, which we were like sliding into each other's DMs about something that's near and dear to both of our hearts, the concept of like dogs experiencing stress when they're confined. And even in the best shelters, dogs often face a loss of agency or control, which can lead to what's called learned helplessness. So I'd love to hear your story. And if it feels right, just maybe highlighting any moments that feel kind of a connection to that concept of learned helplessness.
So I actually made a post the other day that said learned helplessness can look a lot like obedience. And I think that there's a purpose and there's a function there. So I spent 5 years incarcerated. And as an incarcerated individual, there is a high level of both what I would say obedience that comes mostly from fear of aversive situations. But there is also a higher level of learned helplessness within that behavior because any and all choice, agency, control over your environment is completely taken away. As an incarcerated individual, you are told what to wear, you're told what to eat, where to be, when, where not to be. The list of what not to do was very long. And shockingly enough, there isn't a list of what's to do, right? There isn't these are the things that you should be doing. So it's a lot of learning through getting it wrong. And then there being punishment. And I think what started this conversation for us was looking at the stress of pretty extreme environments on both dogs and people, for the more activated and also for the more shut down, right? So it's kind of like you both have this collective learned helplessness, but then you also have this pressure cooker element of things are bound to pop off eventually when you have this many individuals in close quarters. And so knowing how insanely impactful environment is on behavior, I think is so important here for many, many reasons, which I'm sure we're going to get into today.
Mhm. Yeah. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about that, of your experience with how environment impacted your behavior and your feelings while incarcerated.
Except for these very intentional pockets of, for lack of a better term, healing. There was a lot of emotional suppression by choice, but also heavily influenced by the environment and then also heavily influenced by the other individuals. You know, being told to literally cry on the inside by people who are your friends and your peers and your support system, and who say, no, we're not going to do that. Right. So there was a lot of stuffing things down, emotional suppression, which again, it's a pressure cooker effect. That's not really, doesn't go away, never goes away, has to go somewhere. On top of that, the environment is not really conducive to, again, unless you're seeking out the right little pockets where there's intentional work being done, the generalized environment is not conducive to healing. It's either suppressing or we're seeing these little outbursts. For me, I was not the pressure cooker. I was not getting in fights on the yard, which I'm sure is not like a massive surprise to you, that that was not where I was trying to be. I was in the early stages of my incarceration really content to sleep away 5 years. They had offered more medication than I had ever taken in my life. Offered is probably the wrong word because I didn't entirely have a choice and I was sleeping a lot. And so that was my path, was more of the suppression and the shutdown. And so I was less a part of that pressure cooker vibe and more a part of the survival through sleeping, which was the strategy of many. It wasn't until I noticed and then sought out how to be a part of and immerse myself in one of those pockets that things kind of changed for me. And that was the dog training program, which was like not just a turning point for my incarceration, but also for my entire life and career. Um, the behaviors are interesting because highly regulated environment it has to be. So either you're seeing a lot of conformity, or again, you're having these like really aggressive moments. The best way to put it, altercations, things like that.
Yeah, especially if you're feeling like a pressure cooker, like you mentioned, and adding to it the complexities of what how medication can impact different individuals, and not feeling like you have agency over that, I'm sure was extremely violating too.
That was also a really big part of that sort of turning point for me. A lot of things happened all at once over a very short period of time, like maybe just a handful of months, like 3 months. I applied for the dog program, got into the program, moved over there. It was, the actual large institution of 3,600 women. This was kind of tucked back in a corner, and it was one of the three honor dorms. So things were very, very different. We had more privacy. It was a 4-man cell. I came from open housing, 300 women in one room.
Wow.
Not ideal, right? So, but not unlike a shelter environment. That's
Mhm.
the truth. Very, very similar energy in my opinion, in my experience. So that definitely influenced my behavior a lot because I went from sloth mode to doggy boot camp, which was a very different world, even though I could see each building from the other building. It wasn't very far at all, but it was a very, very different world. And I spent the rest of my time at that institution because I was at two different institutions. But the rest of my time at that institution, I spent in that housing dorm, which was a little bit over 2 years.
And was it hard to do you have to like apply to that program, or what's the process to go from the like standard one to the honor one? Like did it take a amount of time, and how does that process work?
It was a process, but it wasn't a lengthy process. It was more to make sure that people really understood what they were signing up for, because there was a lot of different places where you could kind of apply and go be. There was the Greyhound program, which was different than this dog program. There was a recovery program, housing area. There were just different options. So the biggest thing is that you were on a very, very strict schedule and you were working like 8 a.m. until the, count in the morning. And then as soon as that count, it was very, very structured and regimented. And if you had been there for more than a day, you knew that because you saw them out walking all the time. So the process was you would put in like a little form and you would be invited over or passed. You were given like, we had passes that would come each day. And so, it tells where we need to be that day. So you would go over to take a tour, and then somebody who was in the program would explain the program and make sure that you were really truly interested in the commitment of it. And if you were, then you could talk to either the unit manager or the case manager of that housing dorm while you were there, as like an interview. But I don't know that people were really rejected unless they did something off the wall, in the unit manager's office at that point. The idea was that they would bring over people in big waves and then weed them out. People would fall away because they would realize it was not for them. They would get in trouble. And I stuck around. I stuck it out. It was hard as hell, but I stuck it out.
Yeah. Was that a huge shift going from like no structure to then like such a rigid structure?
Oh my gosh, I slept so hard that first day, and it wasn't the like medicated, I'm just sleeping because I have nothing better to do. It was like, I am so tired, my brain and my body, and this like purpose. Yeah, it was completely different immediately day one. And like I said, several things happened kind of all at once over these couple of months. And within, ah, probably 2 weeks of moving in, my bunkie signed me up for a 5K, a
Oh my
like
gosh.
5K group that was like a 10-week preparation for a 5K. I had run once in my life before that. Once, never again, kind of a situation. I was also at the time 230 pounds. So this was, and still at that point, medicated and having to go across the compound twice a day to get my medications. And so the moving into the dog program, the making the decision to get off the medications, and then taking the first steps to take control of my physical health to the best of my ability, those things all happened very, very rapidly. And the actual process of the like interview to getting moved in was probably a week. It was rapid. So yeah, this was like the beginning of a really transformative season, and not one that I thought would have a lifelong impact on my career. Genuinely thought there's no way that I'm going to get out of here train dogs. Absolutely not. Because most people don't want their lives when they are released to look like they did in prison. I wanted to go back to the way things were before. Well, my soul found that intolerable pretty quickly, and was pulled right back into the dog world, and genuinely wouldn't have it any other way.
So I'd love to hear more about what the dog training program looked like that you were a part of. You said there was multiple dog programs in general, like one with greyhounds and then one that you were working on. If you could just tell us a little more about that.
Absolutely. So the Greyhound program was not one that I was a part of. It was in a different housing unit altogether, and they were retired racing dogs who were there to really just learn how to be a pet. And that was a building where they were two-man cells. So each dog had two inmates that were permanently assigned to that dog, and that dog lived in that cell. Or perhaps they had a different setup. I didn't live over there, so I don't know for sure. But it was a retirement home vibe for these dogs. It was great, like very, very chill. And then the program that I was in, even in and of itself, had a lot going on. So there were three different branches, we'll say. The first one and the biggest, chunkiest branch was the daycare. So this was daycare, boarding, and grooming and training for staff dogs. And this isn't just staff of the prison, this was staff of any state employee. So, it could be a highway patrol officer, it could be a warden of a different prison, and pretty high volume. I think the number of inmates in the housing unit was around between 100 and 110. And on higher volume days, we would have 50 plus daycare dogs there. Now, the difference between a daycare that you might, imagine out here in the real world, as they say, is maybe two people to 10 to 20 dogs in a play group. This was very different. Each dog was assigned to an individual, and actually, there were more people than dogs. So every single dog had a person being very attentive to them, and a person who had a desire to learn about dog training. And we were in classes, so we had a really structured routine. Every single morning, after breakfast, and a lot of very, very strict rules. It was run like a boot camp, like make your bed a certain way, and you would get in trouble if they heard you cussing out on the yard. So every single day we would start our day with an hour-long walk, from 8 to 8:50, and everybody was walking. If you didn't have a dog assigned to you that day, you were a spacer in between the people with dogs. That way it was comfortable. And we were just walking the compound with our dogs. And then we would come inside, we'd have a 10-minute break, and then we would go do a lesson from 9 to 9:50. And we would learn about dog training and dog health and dog anatomy and nutrition, anything and everything. And then we would have another little break, and then we would do a training circle for about a half an hour with the dogs, where there would be a collar in the middle and they would be circled up. Everyone's walking around with their dogs and just kind of drilling cues. And then in the afternoon, we did the same thing all over again. It was a lot. It was wonderful. So that was the staff portion. What was so great about that is it's a business. It costs money. Very, very reasonable. I want to say a day of daycare was $3.
Oh, wow.
Right. Very reasonable, right? Like for what they get. And that could be 8 hours, that could be 16 hours. The second branch of that dog program was a service dog program. So they were partnered with a service dog organization who would rotate in dogs who were in their first 2 years of like just the puppy rearing stage, basic obedience, things like that. They would do some task work as well, mostly mobility task training, because we had the setup for that. We didn't really have the setup for anything else. And then the third branch was the Humane Society branch, where we were partnered with the local shelter, and we would normally have probably between 6 and 10 dogs there from the shelter, and they would be rotated through and assigned to an inmate for 6-week rotation. And what I love as a sustainable business nerd is that the staff daycare and boarding program funded the Humane Society program. So it was this self-sustaining thing. And on top of that, we made additional donations to the Humane Society. But we also were able to pay for the food and the gear and the kennels and everything that these dogs needed when they were with us.
I know most prisons are like privatized now, or in the US. So if they were to like start a program like this, I don't know if you know the answer to it. Like, could you like pitch something like this to them? Or like, yeah, like I'm just would imagine this is so powerful of rehabilitating people that are incarcerated that are there and helping these dogs, and it's fully funded. It seems like it's this magical system where I'm like, if every place could have them, yeah.
Actually, yeah, it actually is as powerful as it sounds and appears. And you are not wrong. And I'm not going to spend forever on this, I promise. You're not wrong that when you say that prisons are privatized, what you really mean is that they're for profit, which is
right. Yeah.
The scary thing, in my opinion, when you combine that with the knowledge that the United States incarcerates at a wildly high rate compared to the rest of the world. There was this concept that I heard about when I was in admissions where everybody spends their first 30 days while they kind of categorize you, health-wise, safety-wise, things like that. They call it a petty felony, where individuals are being sentenced to prison time, not just jail time, prison time, 23-day sentences. They never leave admissions, but the institution is getting a check from the state. for every individual that comes in through admissions.
It's almost like positive reinforcement working in a not helpful way in this case, right? Like
For
they're
the community. Yeah. Yeah. The right
yeah,
people.
yeah.
And like these women have children that are now ending up in the system, right? Like things that are just really working against, I think, where our priorities should be when it comes to the prison system. So yeah, this is a beautiful program, and there are programs like this in other prisons all around the country. And they are a win-win-win because they are giving so much purpose to inmates. There was a study that was done, and I'm not even going to try and quote it because I don't know. But I also know that there was, from what I understand from somebody who has spent dozens of years in this particular niche field of dog training in prison, this study said that dog training programs do not reduce recidivism. And recidivism is the likelihood that somebody will return to prison. And I know, at least at the institutions that I was at, we have the numbers to back up that that is not the case, that these programs do reduce recidivism significantly, to where the individuals that go through this program are so much less likely to return. The other piece of it is we're reducing shelter population, not, in massive waves. We can't take thousands of dogs into an institution. But the fact that we are housing humans and dogs at two different facilities within most counties in this country, it just seems like we could be sharing space. And it's something that I am very interested in, to figure out a way to have programs like this be more widespread. The hardest part is there isn't funding within the prison. And even though these programs can bring in money to fund themselves, they could not bring in money to pay somebody to run them. So you need a staff member at these institutions who is willing to give more than they're getting paid to give with their salary, because state employees are not paid, great. So I believe that that's the trickiest part, is that we have burnt out staff who are already overworked and at their limits, because a lot of prisons are also heavily understaffed, which is a problem. And now we're waiting for somebody to raise their hand and say, yeah, sure, I'll work, extra hours, and I'll transport dogs back and forth, and I'll be the emergency contact that you need to call me if something happens with the dog and I need to run them to the emergency vet in the middle of the night. It's not a small ask. For the right person, it's probably like a no-brainer, but it takes, in my opinion, you need three people. I think that you need a really passionate, dog-loving prison staff member, and inmate loving, because it's not enough just to love the dogs. You need a shelter employee who is equally passionate about creating systems within the community, and knowing that that also takes a little bit of extra work, right, to manage that relationship. And then you also need a trainer and somebody who's willing to provide education, because we can't just have inmates, here, take this dog, right? I walked an empty leash for 30 days before they let me have a real dog. And that's important. Like, it's a high risk environment to have 50 dogs maybe on a daycare day. We needed to be pretty buttoned up and pretty smooth and have really good processes, and we did. We really, really did. And we also had inmate leadership, and that matters too. You have to have staff that's willing to trust inmates to lead each other. And that's not always the case.
Yeah, I almost, as you were talking, I was envisioning this new role or something. Yeah, like leading this movement, because I think you're spot on with all of the things it needs, and identifying that from all the different lenses and perspectives that you have, I think is really unique, and potentially like there's something there when you're
It's been
saying
rolling
it. It's
around
like,
in my head for the last 12 months or so, of like,
oh
how do
wow.
I how do I take this and actually make it something that similarly is self-sustaining? Because I'll tell you what I don't want to do. I don't want to go around to prisons and start up dog training programs. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not the answer for me. The
Mm-hmm.
answer is to create something that allows others to create that change within their community. So
Mm-hmm.
if anybody listening is interested in bringing something like this to their community, please do reach out, because the more that I have people saying, yes, we need this, the more fire that I will have to keep fueling the churning of that idea. And hopefully it will coalesce into something that can, become a little bit easier to implement on a nationwide scale.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it would be sustainable in that way too, where it's like not you physically doing everything. It's you
Exactly.
creating a
Exactly.
system. Yeah. Where
That
people can fill
empowers
in these
communities
spots.
to create something. Yes, yes, but with
Yeah.
solid frameworks that have been proven. Because the person I
Mm-hmm.
was talking about is the person who led the dog training program at the first institution that I'm at. I'm still in touch with him. He was my unit manager. He's now retired. He designed the dog training programs within that state prison system back in the 90s, and then spent the last 30 or 40 years refining it. So he's
Mm-hmm.
an invaluable resource. I have other people that I've been talking to about this idea, and it's something that, while, like I said, I don't have anything concrete right now, um, the ideas are there, the passion is there, and I don't feel any sense of urgency because I really want to get this right and have this
Mm-hmm.
be something that is built to last. A self-sustaining system is not a machine that you need to keep feeding, right? It's a machine that feeds itself. So I'm just trying to be really intentional with the creation of something so that it will exist long after I can continue to pour into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to circle back a little bit to when you were talking about the shelter program. So I would imagine that there's some of these dogs coming in through the program that are probably all fall in a spectrum of like some that might be more shut down, some that seem like pretty unaffected, some that I might just be like hyper aroused, or maybe even potentially displaying aggressive behaviors and things like that. And I would imagine that, as you were saying earlier, like being in that space where you don't feel safe to express your emotions, or it probably feels a little bit unsafe even forming connections with other inmates because you're probably always a little bit scared on one level. I would imagine these connections with dogs without words would feel so powerful of like helping you not feel alone, and helping people feel like, wow, I have like a friend. Like, just I think we're such social animals. It's like this would really help people actually feel connected and, like you're saying, have purpose, and help these dogs who also feel so isolated in these shelter environments and are just like dying for enrichment, dying for social connection. That's like, oh, what a beautiful opportunity. And yeah, I used to work at a shelter myself, so I feel like I've seen the kind of the shutdown dog that's, sitting there with their head down low and they're in the corner. And then there's some of the dogs that are jumping nonstop and barking nonstop, and everything in between. And I just feel for them where I'm like, if we have an opportunity here to help them kind of integrate
Yeah.
through this phase, like why not take it, you know?
Yeah. It's kind of like almost like giving them a halfway house, like a soft place to
Mhm.
land, right? And we saw the full spectrum come in. I was in that program long enough to be in positions of leadership in various capacities. For a period of time, I co-led the Humane Society portion. And so I was, really in tune with what dogs were coming in, what dogs were, where we were placing them, rotating them, getting adopted, having to be sent back to the shelter after an incident, knowing that their outlook was probably not great. I was kind of in touch with all of those things. But the very first dog that I kind of got to know from the shelter was the dog that was in my cell when I first moved in there, and she was a senior dog. So think about the senior dogs who are in these shelters where it's just so loud, and like you look at them and you're like, we just got to get you out of here, right?
Mhm.
And She ended up spending the rest of her life there, and she was not the only one. I don't know that I would necessarily say that it was a hospice program because we weren't bringing dogs in that were, complicated medical cases in that regard. But we did bring in senior dogs that ultimately it was not a bad environment for them to come in there. And this dog, her name was Shelby, and she was just an old creaky girl with a mole
Oh.
on her lip, a little sick flopper. And oh my goodness, I was just smitten with her, and she was really comfortable there. And it was actually, she was creaky, and so walks with her were really pretty minimal. And so from the cell out to the potty yard and like a quick little loop is normally enough for her. And just knowing that was a better environment for her than a really loud shelter. And these dogs were also available for adoption. The first Humane Society dog that was assigned to me, his name was Adam, and he's the first reactive dog I ever handled, I ever worked with. And he's the dog that like when I close my eyes and think about putting in the reps of dog training, of like just really learning the mechanics. When people say like, "Oh, you make it look so easy," it's because I've done this 100,000 times. Like that's the dog that I picture of like rain, sun, snow. I was out there. I was putting in the reps. Like we were training together so hard, and he made so much progress. He's also the dog where I first felt emboldened to just like try stuff. He was a suspected lab shepherd and very vocal with his reactions. And so at one point, I noticed he liked to hold stuff in his mouth. So I gave him a tennis ball in his mouth, and we walked. And I noticed he was 50% less reactive because there was no talking crap with your mouth full, right? He was so much more focused. And so I was like, okay, purpose. All right, you need a job. Like you need something to channel your energy and your drive into other than just like, let's walk. And so I saw they had a weighted vest. And so I pulled out this weighted vest, and I put this weighted vest, and we filled up water bottles and put it in the sides. And this dog snapped to attention and walked so purposeful. And another dog barked at him. And I swear he went, "Leave me alone. I'm working. I can't talk shit right now." And he just kept going. And I realized that that's, now, however many years later, 10 years later, I realized that was a form of suppression, probably. But in that moment, getting to problem solve and say, like, okay, he was exploding, and now we have taken this drive and channeled it. And he's so happy and purposeful. And this is a happy story because he ended up getting adopted by uh, um, one of the corrections officers there. And
Oh, good.
it was just really, really great. And yeah, like one of those dogs that just stands out as a massive learning experience for me in my early days of learning about dog training and behavior. Not
And
saying I got it all right with him by any stretch. In fact, probably made a lot of mistakes and learned from all of them.
as we all do. I mean, I think that's one of the most humbling things with dog training and maybe working with animals in general, and probably people too, is there's a point in your learning where you think you know everything and you're like, "Oh yeah, like I got this." And then like you keep doing it and you're like, "I know nothing." And then as time evolves, kind of like it goes back and forth. But the moral of the story being there's always things to improve, and always these
Yeah.
things where you look back even a year ago and you're like, wow, I didn't have the eyes to see this. And it's just an evolution of it. But I'm curious too, in the prison program, was it like what style of training was it if, with your eyes that you have now, out of curiosity?
Very, very different lens now. So it was really interesting to learn in these two different little pods, right? So the first institution, they had their curriculum, they had their education. It was what it was. It was very self-contained. Same thing with the second institution. When I was released, I knew nothing about the, we'll say, language and labels within the industry to define different types of training. I didn't know any of that. I kind of knew positive reinforcement as a concept. So with the lens that I have now, um, the first institution was definitely a balanced approach, meaning compulsion even. but it was interesting because there was no, other than within the service dog kind of portion, there wasn't a lot of requirement for uniformity. So people kind of were allowed to train their way. So I would say some people did end up leaning more positive reinforcement. The second institution I was at was definitely a more positive reinforcement based approach. And they did have a trainer that was coming in to do like monthly lessons on training. Um, what's really interesting is the use of tools and gear and what was allowed, just because there's a lot of security risks and security measures within an institution. I'll tell you what is not allowed is a slip lead. That is absolutely not something that an inmate would be allowed to have. So we weren't allowed to have slip leads, but we were allowed to have prong collars and good dogs. And we were allowed to have head collars until we weren't one day. Like, it was the concept of training from the perspective of rewards and punishment and the concept of training in the form of gear were almost these two very separate things, just in the way that the information was presented and in the way that we were living kind of day to day with the dogs. In the daycare program, if you were assigned a dog, the dog's folder showed up with a collar. That was the collar that that dog was on. You didn't get to say, well, I don't like to work dogs on good dogs. Well, no, this has been decided that this is the collar that this dog wears while they are here. And this is the protocol. So, and it was like, okay, right? Like, so yeah, it's been, and then my own training has definitely swung on that pendulum. I came out and was fascinated by the e-collar as this most modern approach to dog training. That was kind of the marketing as it was presented to me. And then, you know, experienced the fallout of that and kind of swung quite the opposite way and really leaned much more heavily into understanding dogs. So not just positive reinforcement, but understanding dogs and how much more goes into behavior change than any, you know, anything that was even within the four quadrants. And you know, that's kind of where I've landed today, is in a holistically informed positive reinforcement approach is kind of how I guess could put it. But it's been an interesting experience with my education to again sort of be in this environment where we had curriculum, which was printouts, photocopies of printouts, photocopies of photocopies of photocopies. Actually, you could, you know, tell because they were quite askew, and a little library of books. And some of those books were going to be presenting pretty conflicting information. You know, we have Your Dog is Your Mirror. We have Caesar's Way. We have Dog Training for Dummies. We have whatever has been donated into the library. And I was thirsty for all of it. So I read all of it.
Yeah, you bring up so many good points. I feel like when I also was like curious of training, I was so confused as like a young adult, because I was curious even when I was like a teenager. I was training horses, and the horse world's also very like compulsion based. But everything with dogs with those books was very contradictory and just was confusing. And I remember like growing up watching, you know, Caesar Milan's show, and then but I also watched Victoria Stilwell's show, and like there are so many. I feel like that was such a hot topic at that time too, of animal training. It was like all over the media. So I really feel for pet parents who are also like, what the heck? And now with social media, there's so many just different perspectives being shared, and then all these dog trainers pointing fingers and yelling at each other. It's like such a weird world. So when you entered this space, did you find like, did your social circle like shun you for changing your like training ways? Did they not care, or were you like on your own island? Because sometimes I feel like when I'm running my own business, I'm on my own island and no one knows what I'm doing.
Well, definitely didn't have the experience of being shunned, but I don't know that I had surrounded myself with any volume of people for that to have happened. I had definitely self-isolated quite a bit. I was also released from prison in the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
So from lockdown to lockdown, basically, which felt
Wow.
really, I hate to use the word, but it felt really unfair to come
Yeah.
out of that and to be like, all I want to do is go to the mall and go to Target and go get some chicken or something. And I was too afraid to leave the house because I was living with my
Mm.
parents, and like bringing something home to them was just absolutely not what I wanted to do. So no, not at all. And I will say that I did have a circle of trainer friends at that point. And actually I was led in my crossover by a trainer friend who I was doing an interview the other day, and I forgot to say her name, and I wanted to give her a shout out and I didn't. So I'm going to say it here. Her name is Kendall Calloway at Sentient Sparky Dog Training. And she was not only my friend, she was also my apprentice and working for me, and did something that I think is one of the hardest things in the world, which is to say hard things to people that you love, to your friends. And she brought to my attention something within my training that she didn't think was right. And in a conversation, she said something to me that has just like stuck with me for years now, which is that efficiency is not everything. So I was trying
Mm.
to explain to her about how, like, yeah, but this is the most efficient way to help this dog understand. And she just said, efficiency is not everything. Those 4 words was enough to completely shift the way that I see life with dogs, period. Because
Mm.
damn, right? Like that is so layered too. And that was really the beginning of that switch. And I'm really blessed, I think, that the other kind of really, really close trainer friend that I had at that time, she started to watch the shifts in me, and then she started to follow also. So it actually
Mm.
wasn't a shunning. It was a collective shift that's like going to
Mm.
make me emotional to think about, because like it ultimately resulted in an entire network and circle of trainers, I think, moving into a slightly more compassionate approach, maybe even a radically more compassionate approach.
Wow. And I would love to dive deeper in that concept of like efficiency isn't everything and what that meant to you. Could you like uncover that a little bit more of what that really meant to you?
Yeah, so I want to talk about the specifics of kind of what we were talking about. And it was something regarding place training and the way that I was teaching the place cue using physical pressure, both a little bit of spatial pressure, but also leash pressure. And I actually believe in using pressure. I believe that pressure exists regardless of if we're going to acknowledge it or not, in the form of social pressure, in the form of resource pressure, in the form of any way. Like, if your dog is attached to you with a leash, they're probably going to hit the end of it at some point and feel pressure. So I just want to be really aware of it. But there's also a way to use it that is really inappropriate and forceful. And how I had been using it. And so this particular client dog that I was working with at the time, and she was shadowing me. And again, like, so much courage to speak up in that type of an environment, in that type of a situation. I don't think that I could do it. In fact, I've been in situations where I've seen other trainers do horrible things and didn't speak up,
Mhm.
and wish that I had, and so I have so much respect for her. But this was a really sensitive dog. He could have gotten there without it. He could have gotten there without it. And ultimately, I believe that within a profession, dog training is, it's a craft and it's a profession. And where I've kind of landed on this is that there are going to be all different types. And there's always going to be a group of trainers that is going to be pushing the efficiency model. The quick fix trainers are not going away, even though we would like for them and their marketing tactics to go away. I now present myself as the alternative. I'm not going to get you there at the fastest path possible because it's reckless to do so. We're going to take a measured and informed approach because I've seen the fallout. I've seen the side effects of that. I've seen the fact that if you get there too fast, it'll unravel just like that, right? Like you have to just it's even deeper than efficiency is not enough. It's like efficiency doesn't stick in this case. Not always, not always, but it's not enough because it completely ignores the emotions. It completely ignores what they're feeling and what maybe they need that we're not considering. What else might be going on, right? What if this dog is not physically comfortable getting into that position? And at the end of the day, I realized that I was a person who had had my agency fully stripped away in certain situations. And I had been released and come out into the world and taught people how to do that to their dogs. And I refused to do that any longer. And I saw it reflected in my own dog. There was very much like that wake up moment with my own dog where I realized that I had gone down a path that I didn't want to be on. And I've been thinking a lot about like what is the one truth, like the one message that I just really want people to know. And it's that there is never you can never go too far down a path that you can't turn around and walk back, walk a different path, walk that path differently. There's always a chance to start over and try again. And for me, that was in my training. And it shifted everything and actually opened me up to a season of, I would say, like the biggest expansion in my dog training career. Like I learned so much about dogs when I stopped obsessing over controlling them and actually just started
Mm.
studying them. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much cooler than making a dog go on a place bed and lie down. Like, who cares? Like, dogs are cool.
I love that you said that. I feel the same way where I'm like, I just think everything's fascinating. I'm like, wow, in this room, they don't do this behavior, but in this room, they do. Like, why? As
Yeah,
opposed to being like, do it
yeah,
because I said so. Like, I have swung so much that way of like not being that type of trainer either. But I love like sparking that curiosity. And I think you do too. And I'm sure your clients do as well. Of like, once you see things in this lens, you can't unsee it. And then it kind of just shapes this curiosity like throughout life. And it's cool.
you get obsessed with watching your dog, and then you actually realize how much your dog is saying to you. If you can, if only your eyes were listening.
Yeah, it's so true. And their eyes are always listening to us. If you watch, it's like they're always staring at us.
We are saying things to them all the time, and if you're not in touch with that, you may be communicating things that like might not be actually be in alignment with where you want to be going with your dog. So I think it's really
Yeah.
important to kind of self audit with that.
Yes. Yeah, and tying back to what you were saying about pressure, I actually talked about this in like a solo episode too about different types of pressure. So I love that you brought that up and how it's like it's something that exists, and when you're aware of it, it allows you to either like thoughtfully remove or have it stay, or maybe you put on more depending on what you're doing and why. But like I feel similarly
It's
where I'm like we
so
can't
important.
not. Yeah, it's like you can't expect a dog to be on a leash and not like they need to know what leash pressure, like what that would mean. Not that I'm going to be forceful with it, but I'm like, it's going to be something that happens. So I'd rather have them understand when they feel it to like yield to it. So it's a little bit softer for both of you and feels like this
Yep.
conversation. But a lot of, I think on the more far, I don't know the right language, but extreme end of it, a lot of people are like, leash pressure should never be like a steering wheel. And I'm like, well, it kind of it is to a certain degree, like of like, hey, you can't go that way, like we're going this way. Like you know?
I think when used, appropriately, it's a great form of communication as long as it's,
Yeah.
again, gentle and two-way and appropriate. And yeah, I
Mhm.
love talking about pressure because I totally agree. I think that to ignore it is a disservice to getting to know each individual dog because
Mhm.
when you identify that a dog is sensitive to a particular invisible pressure, you change the game.
Mhm.
Like, oh, this dog
Mhm.
wildly sensitive to social pressure. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or spatially sensitive. We need to physically move all training to the middle of the room, right? Like, and everything changes. That dog just doesn't want to be boxed in. Like, those
Yeah.
are so significant.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've had some dogs even that were so sensitive to social pressure of like not wanting to be seen if they're going to the bathroom or if everyone thought it was a big deal, even being like, yay, like they would be like, I can't go. Everyone's making it a big deal.
So
And I was like,
shy. So
yeah.
shy. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's and I feel like I'm like when I relate it to my own life, I'm like, yeah, I get weird under social pressure too. Like if I'm playing a sport and it's the last point, you can almost guarantee I'm going to screw it up because I'll be so nervous.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a
And like,
thing.
I would really want to be intentional to not use resource pressure with a dog who's maybe struggling with resource guarding.
Mm.
So that's something that I would like in the prison context, resource pressure, right? A lot of resource competition. So that's just, I don't know, something that resonates with me as something that I have felt is that like sensitivity to the resource pressure and some training, particularly with impulse control, can almost be aversive to dogs who are sensitive to resource pressure. So like getting to know where your dog's sensitivities are if they have them. I have a really confident dog. He is not sensitive to pressures like much at all, you know? I was thinking about how we use social pressure sometimes when we're walking. If he's lingering a little bit too long, like, come on, buddy, let's go, let's go, let's go. That's a little bit of pressure, right? But it's
Mhm.
not aversive to him. In fact, it actually, if I were to just use, I was thinking about this just yesterday. If because I tested it back to back situations. One time I just said let's go, which is a rehearsed cue, it's a known cue. And he left what he was doing and moved along, but looked neutral when I did my little like side shuffle and my little like, come on, bud, let's go. He got all perked up and he was like, woo, and he got more excited. So it's like you really have to know how is the dog going to respond. My dog is not sensitive to that pressure, so I'm not afraid to use it because pressure can be really good communication when it's done thoughtfully, when it's done appropriately, and when it is focused on that communication and clarity. Because I think it's also important to acknowledge how aversive frustration and confusion can be also. So like if
Mhm.
we have something that is not aversive that we can use to provide a little bit more information for a dog who is struggling, sometimes I think that that can be a really appropriate place to sort of layer in the right kind of pressure for that information, for that clarity, for the right dog.
Totally. Yeah. And so I would love to learn more about your story and definition of the resource pressure. I think that, yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I've heard of that being used in that term. And I feel like my mind's going to be like blown. And so will our listeners.
Yeah, this might just be a term that I use, but I think that there's this element of when we're having our dogs work for their food, and in particular when it's a part of their daily meal, and we have any sort of training where we are physically, visually showing them the food and asking them for things, that is a pressure that if you want this, you got to do a thing. Um, and for some dogs, that can be really challenging. So, like I said, if we're doing impulse control, where we are laying down a piece of food and asking them to leave it, we are layering pressure into that situation with the resource. And then if we mark them and reward them, that's the release of that pressure, of that resource pressure. Um, and yeah, I just seeing that trigger something, I mean, not something, trigger emotional systems within those dogs who are already struggling with resource sensitivity, resource availability, competition, things like that. I think that we can remove resource pressure from training with a really strong marker system and simply not having our food present and having it tucked away. There might be a certain amount of, I don't know, anticipated resource pressure, implied resource pressure in those cases, but I don't see that impacting dogs. But I do
Mhm.
sometimes see dogs like if you have a dog that just woke up and they're starving and you have their breakfast and you are holding it out and making them like that's resource pressure. They have a drive to get that food and they see their breakfast and they are going to feel compelled and pressured to do what you're asking in order to relieve that pressure and get that resource. There's a lot more going on than that, but I also see it as a pressure.
Mhm. And would you think that would be the same thing? I know a lot of people do this, of like having their dogs like sit and wait before they put their like breakfast bowl down, or do you feel like that's different, or would you consider that also resource pressure?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I think that that definitely could be resource pressure. I will say I make my dog sit and wait for food. Actually, he tends to go to his place bed, and then I release him. He darts over. But here's why. If your dog is going to slap the food bowl out of your hands as it's going down to the ground, there's a function and a reason to be able to get it down and step away so you don't end up getting slapped. It's not about making him wait minutes. It's just about having a routine that is appropriate because like as a human have boundaries. He as a dog has boundaries. I try and respect his boundaries and I want to help him respect my boundaries. I don't like getting slapped at dinner time. Only when
Mhm.
we're wrestling, not at mealtime. Definitely not when I'm trying to put down like a water bowl when it's then just going to be a mess. So I do use that skill with my dog because I have a function for it. But that's definitely resource pressure, and that's why that is such a hard thing for dogs to hold in that moment because their whole meal is there. And another way to alleviate that would be to like feed your dog 60-70% of their meal and then train with some of it. So that way they're not
Mm.
as hungry. A dog that's not as hungry is not going to be as affected by that resource pressure.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think with any, like, training, like, protocols and things we're learning, there's so much individual variation, like you're saying, of the different individuals have different spatial, like, sensitivities or
Mhm.
pressure sensitivities, and some of these things might work well for some dogs that aren't sensitive to them, and it might be aversive to another.
You want this
Mhm.
thing, you want this thing, and they're building, they're building. Think of,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
retriever waiting for the ball to get thrown, and then you throw it, it's going to relieve that pressure. Also drive. That's also going on. What I'm describing is the relationship between the person, the reward, and the dog. To me, it is something that is almost learned. Some dogs are going to, I think, come in with this kind of intuitive resource pressure, right? It's like, oh, I see it, I want it. But I think that this is something that is almost built up of like, oh, I know what we're doing. I know that we're training and working. So in order to get that thing, I have to do this thing. Anticipation. And that is a huge factor within drive is like the buildup of that motivation.
Mhm. A lot of my clients, I feel like my marketing makes it obvious that my choices in training and how I try at least to set learners up. So a lot of them are more on the anxious side, the humans, and being like, "I don't wanna, like, harm them. I don't wanna do anything wrong."
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, "Okay, well, you have boundaries too," like you said, where I'm like, "This is almost like you're negotiating, like, they can't make all the decisions because if that was the case, they would never wanna come back inside, and you gotta go to work to pay the bills." So, like, you
Isn't
have this give
living
and
with
take.
any other creature about compromise? Like that's part of
Yes.
it is learning to meet in the middle to a certain degree. Or sometimes it's about them and sometimes it's about us.
Right, yeah, and, like, how do we have these parameters of, like, "Okay, this is your sniff time." Like, you pick where we go kind of within these guidelines and yeah, and making it work for the individual dog and the individual person. And I think at the end of the day, that's what I think helps people the most is, like, instead of having so much rigidity, it's like, how do you in the way like, the kindest way that you know how, communicate your needs and are aware, thoughtful of your dogs and learning and growing over time because I don't think it's ever perfect, but we can try our best to
No.
be better today or tomorrow.
But you're absolutely right. I feel like now more than ever, I'm having dog parents come into my world who are afraid to take even a single step because they're so afraid of doing the wrong thing.
Mhm.
Because there's a lot of like you know, fearful language out there describing training. And like, I get it. Fallout can be really scary. But at the end of the day, you don't need to learn everything there is to know about dogs. You don't need to learn about every pressure out there. You don't need to learn about the four quadrants. You just need to know about
Mhm.
your dog. Like you just need to know about your dog. And that's why working with a professional is so beneficial, is because we're going to tell you the pieces that you need to know to help you understand your dog, as opposed to the great wide world of dog, which is,
Yeah.
I'll nerd out about it all day, but it's a lot.
Yeah. It's just like a lot of noise, I call it.
So much noise. Yeah, that's what I say too and it's just really hard for them to discern what is right because that noise is at times conflicting. And
hmm
I mean, how are you supposed to make a decision when you're having conflicting instructions presented to you? I would not make a decision well in that situation. I would be completely in task paralysis. I think if I were, to be a dog parent who needed help with my dog and to just go onto the Google, oh my God, I think I would go down a 72-hour rabbit hole and feel no closer to any answers.
I know. I will say one thing I'm impressed with AI is ChatGPT seems to lean positive reinforcement based and giving you information as to why, where I've had some clients tell me they've looked up a lot of things on that or had it fact check things that they were confused about. And it helped actually guide
Mm,
them. When I was looking at it, I was like, actually, this is like fairly accurate of like it's not the best, but it's better than Google was with all everybody's blogs and stuff. It's like it seems like it
yeah,
was pulling from more credible things where I'm like, that's kind of cool. And if any listeners are like, oh, I'm confused here, sometimes even popping it in that could be something to give you a little bit more background information to make your own discernment too, or have your own discernment.
right. Like, give me a little bit of background on this, or can you help me understand that? Or what's the difference between this and that?
Yeah, yeah. So kind of cool. I bet you, as time goes on, it will probably evolve and hopefully it continue to improve. Before we finish up, are there any last minute thoughts that you want to leave listeners with in terms of anything to do with your story or your experience or work with dogs?
One of the things that has struck me the most about the industry over the last few years, and not in a good way, is the messaging that seems to be targeted at pet parents that is telling them that they're not enough for their dogs. And it
Mm,
bothers me so much. And there's a lot to that because I do believe that the rise in board and trains and the super high ticket dog training prices are tied to that messaging. But I think it's pushing a savior complex society where people are waiting for somebody to swoop in and save the day and fix their dog. And that is not how it works. And I am genuinely not actually naturally gifted at this. I am so clumsy and awkward. When I say I spent 30 days working an empty leash before they let me walk even a tiny little dog, that is not an exaggeration. I'm only good at this because I'm practiced at it. And if I can learn it, clumsy literally voted most likely to trip across the stage at graduation. And learning the skills in a high stress environment, if I can do it, like trust, you can do it too. You can do it too. If there are parts of dog training that are not something that is physically capable for you, there are really, really great adaptive training methods. Um, I believe that there are areas in the dog training industry where every person and every dog can come and learn. And I believe that every person can be and become the person that lives the life that they want with their dog. And nobody's going to come in and do it for you. Like you have to do it, but you can do it, right? It's this
Mhm.
kind of, okay, yeah, like it does take work. It does take work, but you can do it. And that that's really been another thing that I've just been trying to get out there as much as I can because the number of people that come to me and, oh, you're my fourth trainer. I've spent thousands of dollars. I sent my dog to this $6,000 board and train. I just want to let people know earlier on in the process that they can do it and to not feel nervous to reach out for help if they're feeling overwhelmed because it's an overwhelming world right now.
Mhm.
There's too much information out there now. And so learning to have discernment is and like critical thinking skills around information is actually more important than anything else.
I completely agree on all of that, honestly. And I think that's I feel like I push in my own not push, but in my own programs, like my coaching program the most because I'm like, it's really like you're getting your own results like it's like you're having a sport coach like right by your side being like now's your timing like and just helping with these little nuances, but it's truly just it can be simplified and just take the load off of people if they have the right like framework, but they have to be, if they're the ones doing it, I feel like so much confidence can grow and the relationship grows. And
That's
it's
the other
beautiful to
piece
watch.
too, is the relationship. Yeah, I would never, I couldn't dream of taking that away from my clients, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I phrased it recently. You can't outsource relationship building. Like
Mm-mm.
that has to be, and the the getting to know your dog and doing that in parallel with building the relationship is the most fun part. It's the best part of this whole thing.
Yeah.
So again, like to think that I have to come into the picture, grab the leash, kabop pam pow, right, and show off, and it just
Yeah.
doesn't help. It doesn't help, and that's taking away the best part. That is not my dog. That is not my relationship. That's not my life.
Yeah, yeah, and, like, almost going against the popular narrative of these flashy, showy things that you see on social media or a lot of, like, "Look what I can get dogs to do," as opposed to, like, how do you actually just simplify it and make it as easy as
Mm.
possible for that human and that dog to just live in harmony, and it doesn't need to look like a rigid training protocol unless they want it to and they're having fun doing it.
Right. There are some dogs that love obedience training, love learning things, love engaging. Like the more cues, the better. Like, let's go,
Yeah.
let's do it, let's work. And some dogs are like, can we just like do a bare minimum, please? In which case, stick with the basics and like have fun with them and play. Play and
Yeah.
joy are really important. I believe that joy accelerates learning with your
It
dog.
really does. Yeah, no, it really does, and it's such a good, like, thing to just compete with, like, fear or anxiety. It's like if you're having fun, you kinda those things fall aside. It's hard to be having a ton of fun and feel afraid at the same time. I don't know if it's possible. But yeah, and I love that where I'm like, "Just make it even if it's
I don't
silly
know.
and
I've been on the
imperfect."
roller coaster. I think it is
That's true.
possible.
That's a good point. Yeah, you're right, where you're like, "Oh," like, I'm, like,
No,
crying and laughing at the same time.
but that's generally like at the end of those experiences, those are positive experiences. There's adrenaline, there's other things going on that come from the fear, but as long as there actually is true safety, even if there's this perceived lack of safety, like I'm upside down, right? But like there
Mhm.
is true safety. I think it can be a positive experience and
Yeah.
actually resilience building, capacity building. It's like,
Mhm.
wow, I did that hard thing. Oh my gosh.
I know, I know. I feel like there's so many little nuggets of like, yeah, of just so much of why I like we love training in this way. Like, yeah, you get to know the individual, you have fun, build resilience, and it's not going to be perfect. And sometimes we're going to accidentally be aversive, and I think that's life, to be honest. Um,
Literally, that's life.
yeah, I'm like, I don't know
It
any
happens to me
relationship.
every day where like,
Yeah.
yeah, where something turns out to be aversive and nobody planned for it to be.
Yeah, or like you have a relationship with someone, you said the wrong thing and you're like, "Oh crap, that hurt them and I didn't mean to." And we can apologize with our language, but with dogs, we don't have our verbal language like that. And it just yeah, it's an interesting thought experiment. I feel like I'm always kind of left with that where I overthink it and I'm like, "Wow."
Yeah. Hey, we'll take the train all the way to the station.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Where can people find you if they want to learn more from you? And I know you also help trainers out too. So I'd love to plug both your info in there.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Freed by Training. You can also check out my website, freedbytraining.com. The resource that I try and get out there is my free muzzle course, because I just really
Ooh.
believe that muzzle conditioning should be freely available for all dogs. I think all dogs should be conditioned to a muzzle, but particularly the ones that have need, to be able to exist in this world. I just want to make that free. That's on my website, also freedbytraining.com/muzzle. And yeah, I love working with other trainers and professionals, both on behavior education, business coaching. So find me on my website, find me on Instagram, reach out and chat and see if any of the programs I have going on kind of line up with what you're looking for. But I love working with dog parents who are overwhelmed and confused with their dogs. I do a daily training style with my virtual clients. So if you're looking for a really high level of support, that's kind of my jam.
Beautiful. I love that. And that probably, I would imagine, ties back to your daily practice of training too. And you get so much reps in. That's brilliant. Yeah. Well, I love that. Thank you again for coming on and sharing your story and your wisdom and just like your expertise with everything. Thanks for hanging out with me on the Co-Regulated Canines podcast. If you love this episode, it would mean the world to me if you subscribed, left a review, and shared with a friend. Your support helps more people and their dogs find a little more ease and connection in their lives. Want to dive deeper? Follow me on Instagram at Co-Regulated Canines. That's CO_regulated, the letter K, the number 9, S, or head to www.coregulatedcanines.com for more resources. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of your pup, and keep building those connections.